I might share my reminiscences on 9/11. Hi, on 9/11. Uh, give you a quick heads up. I suspect at some point I'm probably going to be swearing. So if that isn't your cup of tea, you might want to pass on this video. Well, we'll see what happens. So for some reason, I remember I was sleeping on the couch. I'm not in one of those families where the guy ends up on the couch after a fight. We don't do that kind of silliness. My daughter was pretty young at the time, so she was probably hogging the bed, would probably be the best guess. And I ended up turning on the TV. And I think what had happened is my boss probably called me from the base. I was active duty at the time. And he probably said, hey, there's something security wise going on. Base is locked down. Don't come. We'll give you a call later and tell you what to do. So I watched the TV, saw the first building smoking because obviously they didn't really catch the first hit. Then the second hit occurred, and then a little bit later, I ended up waking up my wife and letting her know what was going on. And then, of course, the Pentagon got hit, and that's when I remember telling my wife, "We're under attack. This isn't good." Now I know one of the things that occurred to me at the time, and it wasn't the whole we're gonna go get them and kind of thing. Is like more of a this is gonna be bad for the United States because every freaking dirtbag out there in Congress who's got some kind of new police power or some kind of crackdown or some kind of security thing that they've been trying to do for the last 10, 20 years is all going to get packaged up into some big freaking crackdown. Didn't take a whole lot of prescience to see that was coming. And I also suspected that we were never really going to get a solid feel of victory out of this. That uh, it wasn't like it wasn't going to be World War II where we found the enemy, tracked them down, took them out, and there was this great sense of a final victory or anything else like that. So uh, I remember one of the first things that happened, which was really interesting, was all when we finally did come into the base, uh, they pretty much had everyone come in at the same time, and the traffic because they were doing individual searches on every single vehicle coming in, and the traffic was backed up for miles, people waiting to get in. And I remember looking at these long lines and saying, good God, this is a gigantic freaking target. I mean, all you had, if there were a terrorist that wanted to kill as many U.S. servicemen as humanly possible, all they had to do was get in that line, and at a certain point, far from the gate, where the SPs and the rent-a-cops weren't in a position to do anything, have a bunch of ammo loaded up in your car, step out the door, and start walking down the line, blowing people away. You probably could have killed 100 people before someone actually stopped you. Because, of course, in the military, you're not allowed to carry a gun in your vehicle. So, part of that is when we started seeing the first of what I would call security theater. Because I brought up that complaint saying, hey, all these people stacked up out there, aren't we, basically creating a giant target? Wouldn't it be smarter to stagger arrival times and other stuff like that and come up with better ideas? And never heard anything back on that. So either they thought they were too smart for for that to happen, or they just ignored it. Quite frankly, I believe that they didn't actually think there was a significant threat. Uh, Either that or they're just stupid, and either or is equally like possible considering the military. I mean, the military is capable of doing truly stupid things, uh, and there may have been really no threat, and they knew it. One of the oddball things, again, that happened right around this time. So, I mean, there was kind of this lull for a bit, and then we started seeing the inevitable march towards Iraq. And at the time, I was pretty active in the Libertarian Party, and it got really weird. So, the first thing that happened was we got a whole bunch of people calling us up and say, hey, take my name off your list. Any mention of me anywhere, we want gone. We don't want to be associated with this at all. And the reason why they were doing this is they were afraid that some kind of government crackdown was going to occur, and they were actually going to start rounding people up. And to be honest, I don't fault those people because there were times the same kind of thoughts entered my head. So I I have no problem with people coming to that conclusion because the Libertarian Party isn't worth ending up going in jail over. But the other thing that happened were the chicken hawks. So we had a group of people that stayed on who were adamantly for everything that was about to come down. Uh, it was a mix of members of the tribe and people who were really high on being pro-Israel, Randians, and a few other people, and they all kind of had this idea that this was going to be this massive blow against fundamentalist Islam, and that the Middle East was going to be remade in a way that was much, much more conducive to people who were either atheistic or more secular. And these chicken hawks were out and out. So the Libertarian Party, of course, their position was kind of neutral. Because on one hand, they weren't in favor of the war. To a certain extent, we were in favor of, you know, America getting back at the people who'd caused this, but we we're deeply concerned that the net would be cast very wide and then there would be crackdowns at home, which definitely occurred. But these chicken hawks wanted the Libertarian Party to come out firmly for the coming war in Iraq, basically saying, yep, we're all for everything the United States does in the Middle East because it's going to be a net good in the end. And I really wonder just exactly how those chicken hawks feel today. Uh, I mean, I wonder if any of them are willing to admit that they were just absolutely fucking wrong and didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. I doubt it, but it's like I would love to see some of you face to face and just say, "How do you feel now?" I mean, how hard was it to see that the U.S. was going to just basically screw it up all the way through, and you weren't going to get anything of what you wanted, and there'd be lingering effects forever on afterwards. All you have to do is look at history to get that. Now, in the aftermath of it all, it was pretty clear that, you know, the whole thing was centered on Afghanistan. But the weird thing is, being in the, uh, at that time, I was in Intel organization. And, there's different disciplines going on. There's photo interpretation people, there's map making people, spectral people, all kinds of different things going on. And walk around at all these computers and all their monitors, and everything's got a map of Iraq up. Everything, and everyone's painting targets and uh, figuring out the geography of everything to figure out movement and setting up landing fields and all kinds of other stuff like that. And it's like, okay, but we know Afghanistan did this. Why are we looking at Iraq? And, at the time we were kind of joking. It was like the Eye of Sauron. The Eye of Sauron was looking at Iraq, and it was definitely going to go there. So even though at the initial point, everything was pointing at Afghanistan, we had nothing pinning this on Iraq. It was pretty clear that this is where we're going. We were going to come up with a reason for war. It was just a given. And that was kind of creepy because, you're sitting there going, okay, well, here's what we know. And we kept kind of getting this whole, well, we haven't, we're, the question has a different answer than you're giving us, and keep working until you get the answer we want. So one of the first weird things that came up was Iraq's supposed closeness to having a nuclear weapon. Now, previous to working with the guys I was working with there at in Colorado, the I was essentially working with one of the organizations whose primary job was keeping track of nuclear treaties. So they had a really good idea what capabilities various countries had. And one day, I would have basically assumed that Iraq wasn't even close to having a nuclear bomb. And then all of a sudden, leaked intel on TV is saying, oh, yeah, they're really close. So it's like, how on earth? They don't have the infrastructure. What's going on here? And so I talked to some of my old buddies who were back doing the treaty stuff, and they're like, we don't know. And they're thinking, well, maybe there's some secret, SCI level program that we don't know about. Maybe there's a parallel organization that's doing the same thing we got, but they got different equipment. And the military government does that stuff where they have basically two or three organizations doing the exact same thing. And so, yeah, we were really confused. And then when it came out that it was all human stuff, that yeah, we got this talking to people, and we have human sources that told us this. Well, usually that's the worst form of intel out there. So everyone's like, oh, okay, this is BS too. And then I remember then one of the next things came out when they were trying to justify this was Colin Powell at the UN showing pictures of the mobile biolabs. And we worked alongside some of the photo interpreters at that time. And when they saw that briefing, they were laughing because they know those things weren't mobile biolabs. You could use, and those were basically downscaled pictures, and they could still tell they weren't. And pretty much everyone says, wow, either Colin's setting himself up for future gains where he's, where basically he's taking one for the teams and getting something up later, or he's going to be a patsy at some point and they're just going to basically tank his career and he's going to have no more mobility. I guess it turned out to be the latter on that one. So the guys I was working with ended up getting involved with the great scud hunt, which actually turned out to be a bit of a snipe hunt. We were using some new technology. Uh, the technology itself wasn't new, it was being used in more of a new way. And essentially, there was a really high priority call for finding scuds. And the obvious reason is it's one of the few things they had that was potentially capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. It wouldn't have probably carried a first generation nuclear warhead, which, if Iraq was that close to the nuclear bomb, which it wasn't, and nobody really believed they were, they wouldn't have the kind of bomb that would have been able to be fit into that level warhead. It would have to have been at least a second generation bomb to make it in there. But so they needed Scuds, because if you got a bomb, you have to have a delivery system. That's the only way you have a threat. And I did think it was a little bit far fetched because I actually did have some weird background where I have a little bit of familiarity with actually how a Scud launch works. I was present for one. And these things are cantankerous as hell. Essentially, I can't remember if I can say everything in the terms of the details, but just put it this way: is if you prep it to a certain point, you pretty much have no choice but to launch it because it'll start breaking down and be unusable. And there's all kinds of stages that essentially cause you to have to, if you prep it to a certain level and then try to turn it off, you basically have to go and refurbish half the stuff in it to make it work again. So it seemed kind of unlikely, but essentially the story we were being told was that they believed that they were playing shell games where they were moving these mobile scuds around in the desert and they wanted to tack something down. Now, what we found weird was is we were using something brand new to look for these things, and all the guys who had like the old timey, satellite imagery and all this other stuff were staying away from the scuds with a 10 foot for like with a 10 foot pole. And what we started realizing was we were kind of suckers because everybody who joined in on the scud hunt uh, were essentially going to look like fools in the end because pretty much everybody knew there could not possibly be a functional scud in Iraq's inventory just because of uh, how long we'd been looking at them for almost 10 years at that point, actually more, and how fragile these things are once you try to set them up, that they just didn't exist. So people who had real capabilities weren't looking for these at all. Whereas we were sitting there poking around the desert trying to find them, and none to no avail. So that was a good example of leadership demanding to see something that pretty much Intel had already came to the conclusion didn't exist. So I ended up getting deployed to the desert. And I don't want to infer that I was in any place even close to like what these guys in the picture were. I was in a tent city in Qatar, uh, had air conditioning. It was pretty much safe, just boring as hell. Uh, I do know it was one of the biggest wastes of time of my life. And, a lot of ways it felt like being an accomplice to a crime because all the stuff was going on. You knew that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and we were just going forward anyway. And so, we're helping paint targets and stuff like that, which, yeah, not a lot of fun. I mean, it was an interesting experience, but I could have easily skipped that for the rest of my life. Now, one of the things that was pretty interesting was um, so we get all the various intel briefings, and uh, one of the things that was repeated over and over again was that the military was firmly convinced that if we were going to go in and occupy Iraq, we did not have enough manpower to do it. That essentially there would be large swaths of the country that would be either in civil war or at least complete disorder because we lacked the troops. We lacked the troops because Dick Cheney decided that he was a military super genius and he came up with a brand new form of warfare that didn't need that kind of amount of troops. And a lot of the civilian side was still thinking that we were going to come in being greeted as liberators with people throwing flowers at us and stuff. Uh, and they kept on talking about how they wanted to basically occupy Iraq the same way Germany and Japan had been occupied at the end of World War II. And again, all the intel briefers and everybody who had any background says it's not going to happen. The geography's wrong. The Iraqi people are at least three distinct different subsets. They're never going to get along, and we're never going to be able to. It would take generations of a massive occupation to force this together as a country. So the military already knew what was going to happen. If the civilians actually believed their stuff, where that they thought it was going to be a grand liberation, and then we'd occupy the country and turn it into a democracy, I don't know. I mean, I've seen some people claim that the goal was essentially to make a fragmented Middle East. And it almost seems too good to be true because I don't think the government's smart enough to plan that well. Now, one of the interesting things I did get out of this deployment, so what we were doing there is we were supporting special forces. And again, I'm not saying I was in special forces. I was a desk jockey, donut eating, roller chair Air Force dude giving information to real war fighters. Uh, and these special ops guys, a lot of them had come from Afghanistan to here, and they were pissed. They were really pissed. They, uh, primarily, what they were telling me was that when they first infiltrated and started working their way in there, they were making contact with people in the Taliban. So essentially, the Taliban had two different major factions. A lot, actually, they had a lot more than that, but the two major groups were one group that uh, was in favor of having foreign Al Qaeda types in their country, and the other faction didn't want any foreigners in their country at all. Well, Special Ops made contact with the faction that didn't want foreigners in their country, and they were pretty much willing to give up uh, bin Laden, all his cronies, and the upper leadership of the Taliban that had supported this. They were willing to give us addresses, safe houses, escape routes. They were willing to guide us into things. Now, to a certain extent, we would have been getting, if we would have done that, we would have been getting involved in, essentially some thousand-year-old feud where one side got to take out the other. But at the same time, our special forces operators believed that we probably would have got most of the Al Qaeda leadership turned over to us alive. To quote them, we could have paraded Osama bin Laden in an iron cage through Times Square if we wanted to. Uh, and then right at the point, so Dick Cheney said no, because he's a fucking super genius. Fucking super genius. He goes, nah, we're not going to do that. We can't have good Taliban and bad Taliban. That's too confusing for the Americans. We need one solid enemy. And, taking it down in that manner, just, yeah, we don't want to do it that way. We want this big fucking goat fuck of a war. So that'll be, everything will look fantastic on TV. So, Al Qaeda broke and ran for the hills. And according to our special ops guys again, they believe that they were probably within weeks of getting him all rounded up, either killing him or capturing him. And that's right at the point where good old Dick Cheney says, hey guys, instead of going after him, we're going to take you and throw you in Iraq, and we're going to start inserting you for the get you in a position for the upcoming invasion. So right at the point, we almost had him a second time. We took the guys out who knew the lay of the land, pulled them out and put them in Iraq, and replaced them with grunts who didn't know the lay of the land, and basically ended up letting them slip through their fingers. Um, to say that those guys were the special ops guys, to say that they were pissed is an understatement. Uh, yeah, and they wondered why, when Dick Cheney came to say hi, that I refused to go to the little rally he was at. Yep. So this was the same genius who decided that we didn't need that many troops. Well, once it was all done, and I didn't actually end up in Iraq. I came close, but they decided that we wanted to move our equipment home, and they needed somebody who could actually get it there, because it would have gotten abandoned on the side of a runway if I hadn't been there. Quite frankly, I wasn't all that interested in going at that point. And I remember right at the point I was about a month from retiring, 2004, and there was some general from somewhere, don't know who the hell he was. And this guy gets up and he's talking about, you know, the Cold War and how it's over and all this other stuff. And he said, boy, things were looking pretty bleak there, boys. Yeah, people were actually had legitimate reasons for cutting funding and all this other stuff. And then I'm quoting him: "Thank God for the global war on terror. This is going to guarantee funding lines for the next 20 to 30 years because there's no way this can be won in any short amount of time. So this is the greatest thing that ever happened." Yeah, fuck him. Yeah, fuck him. But anyways, so that was pretty much the end of my stint with the military and all that. And I get out, and I look back at it now, and people are, "Oh, should get all patriotic and teary eyed on 9/11." I don't. I can't. Okay? A lot of people died. A lot of people died in the towers. A lot of first responders died. A lot of military died. A lot of foreigners who were a lot of them who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time died. And for what? What did all these people die for? Well, we got Afghanistan. It's probably worse now in terms of causing us danger than before we went in. Okay, we got Iraq is a disaster area. It's so bad that a lot of the people there wish Saddam Hussein was still there. We've spent well over $1 trillion buying weapons and keeping troops overseas and keeping this all together. And our standard of living is absolutely tanked during that time. It's not a coincidence. We got a giant, bloated, expensive military. We're paying more for our military to fight the global war on terror than we did to stand up against the Russians and the Chinese during the height of the Cold War. And it's a military that probably can't stand up to an army of a peer because it's been set up and trained to fight goat herders. Our liberty's been repressed at home. We're at the point where uh, we have security theater at the airports, and it's pretty much acknowledged it's useless. It's just there to keep the terror going. Our speech is being censored, and now all the spy agencies are spying on us. It's like pissing on the graves of the people who died for all this. It really is. It's not good enough to just basically uh, pop Osama bin Laden and dump him in the ocean someplace. I mean, that's not really a fitting end, and it's not the end because it's still going on. All this crap that came down because of it is still there. This is the monument to all the people who died, and it's horrific to me. Well, that's probably enough ranting for one evening. Uh, Comment below. How do you think? How do you think the global war on terror went? Uh, any of this information news to you? Smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm brought you here and you're not one of my regular subscribers, consider subscribing. This is an unusual one for me, so you might want to check some of my other ones out before subscribing. And of course, if there's somebody you think might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thanks for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.